It's the moment millions around the globe have been fiercely holding their breath for. The grand stage was left empty as 7 global icons embarked on a grueling journey of military duty and intense self-discovery. But what exactly happens behind closed doors when the world's biggest pop phenomenon finally aligns the stars once more? How did they survive the silent years of isolation and crushing solo pressures to emerge even stronger? Are you truly ready to dive deep into the raw tears, the untold sacrifices, and the hidden struggles behind their legendary return? Welcome to the ultimate countdown, exploring the emotional journey of BTS reuniting as OT7.
Number 7. Jin, the first to leave, the anchor of return. When we talk about the monumental pause of the world's biggest boy band, we absolutely have to start with the man who bravely took that terrifying first step into the unknown, Kim Seok-jin. Imagine the immense, crushing weight on the shoulders of the eldest brother, knowing that the entire world was watching his every single move, analyzing his departure as the official start of an agonizingly long hiatus for a fandom of millions. Do you remember that bittersweet December morning in 2022 when the news broke that Jin officially entered the recruit training center in Yeoncheon, Gyeonggi Province? It wasn't just an enlistment, it was the shattering of an era and the beginning of a profound test of loyalty for armies worldwide. Before he left, he gifted us The Astronaut, a hauntingly beautiful farewell letter co-written with Coldplay, a sonic masterpiece promising that he would inevitably return to his universe. But what was truly going through his mind as he stood there with a freshly shaved head, trying to smile bravely for his younger brothers who gathered to send him off in the freezing winter cold? He masked his internal anxiety with his trademark humor, strictly telling fans not to come to the training center to ensure safety. But deep down, the abrupt transition from being a global superstar performing at sold-out international stadiums to becoming a regular, disciplined soldier must have been a profound psychological shock. Yet Jin didn't just survive the military, he absolutely dominated it, earning the highly coveted title of an elite soldier and serving fiercely as an assistant drill instructor. He set an incredibly high standard, quietly proving that BTS's insane work ethic and dedication translates seamlessly into every single aspect of life. But think about the intense isolation, the sheer quietness of the military barracks compared to the deafening, earth-shaking roars of Wembley or SoFi Stadium. How did he cope with the sudden, jarring silence of a life away from the spotlight? He coped by meticulously planning ahead, recording a series of monthly video messages titled Message from Jin long before he enlisted, a true testament to his unwavering, almost stubborn love for the fans, ensuring that even in his physical absence, his digital footprint would keep the emotional connection powerfully alive. Then came that glorious, unforgettable day in June 2024, the highly anticipated discharge. The exact moment the military gates opened, the world virtually stopped, but absolutely nothing could have prepared us for the legendary, chaotic sight of leader RM enthusiastically playing the saxophone to celebrate his return. It was hilarious, deeply emotional, and a pure, unfiltered Bangtan moment that instantly signaled the dawn of their eventual grand reunion. But Jin didn't even take a single moment to rest or readjust to civilian life, did he? Literally less than 24 hours after taking off his military uniform, he threw himself directly into the chaotic, beautiful, and overwhelming embrace of the 2024 BTS Festa, hosting a massive in-person event where he literally hugged 1,000 fans. Can you even fathom the immense emotional fortitude and sheer physical stamina required to transition from a strict, rigid military commander to a softly smiling idol giving out free hugs? The physical exhaustion must have been unimaginable, yet his eyes sparkled with a desperate, glowing yearning that had been locked away for 18 long months. He openly and bravely confessed to the crowd how incredibly nervous he was, how his hands violently shook while holding the microphone again, terrified by the irrational fear that he might have forgotten how to be Jin of BTS after being Sergeant Kim Sek-jin for so long. This raw vulnerability is exactly what makes his specific journey so incredibly compelling and relatable. He instantly became the solitary anchor of the group, holding down the fort out in the real world while the other 6 members subsequently served their terms. From majestically carrying the Olympic torch through the historic streets of Paris ahead of the 2024 Summer Games, to launching his highly entertaining and chaotic solo variety show, Run Jin, Jin bore the heavy, unspoken responsibility of keeping the BTS name shining brilliantly in the global mainstream all by himself. He released his solo album Happy, spreading joy and pop rock anthems. But beneath the bright smiles and the worldwide promotions, he was essentially testing the waters, carefully paving a safe and vibrant path for his brother's eventual return to the industry. Every time he mentioned the other members on screen, whether it was playfully bickering about J-Hope's impending discharge or sending supportive messages to the Maknae line, you could hear the subtle, emotional crack in his voice, a poignant reminder that his monumental solo success was merely a beautiful placeholder for the ultimate grand goal, the full OT7 reunion. He wasn't just performing for his own solo glory, he was diligently keeping the throne warm, guarding their collective legacy with an unmatched ferocity. As he finally watches his brothers return to his side one by one, culminating in this massive reunion, the sheer relief and overwhelming joy he must feel is something mere words barely capture. The eldest young, who had to be the bravest first, who had to face the daunting uncertainty alone, is finally getting his chosen family back. How will his diverse solo experiences, his newfound rugged resilience, and his countless unspoken sacrifices ultimately shape the dynamic of the newly reunited septet? Will the massive weight he carried alone for years finally be lifted, allowing him to lean on his brothers once more? Or has it transformed him into an entirely new, unshakable pillar of strength for the group's highly anticipated new chapter? The magical, historic journey of OT7 reunion wouldn't even exist without Jin bravely opening the heavy door to the military era and waiting patiently, faithfully on the other side. Think about the countless nights he must have spent looking at old concert footage, wondering if the explosive synergy they shared could ever be perfectly replicated after such a long forced pause. The entertainment industry moves at lightning speed. Trends change in the blink of an eye, and new groups debut every single week. Yet Jin stood his ground against the rapid currents of the K-pop industry, proving that true legends do not fade with time. His journey from the tearful goodbye in late 2022 to the triumphant, tear-soaked reunion is a masterclass in endurance. He essentially had to relearn how to be an idol, shaking off the rigid discipline of the military to embrace the fluid, expressive art of performance once again. And he did it all while holding his breath for the day the stage would feature 7 microphones instead of just 1. When that OT7 music finally drops, listen closely to Jin's voice. You won't just hear the silver voice that we all know and love. You will hear the profound relief of a man who crossed the desert alone and finally found his oasis.
Number 6. J-Hope, The Sunshine's Eclipse and the Dance of Triumphant Return. When you think of the beating heart and the relentless driving pulse of BTS, your mind instantly and unquestionably gravitates toward the man who literally embodies the spirit of hope, Jungkook, universally known as J-Hope. But what happens to a group and what happens to a fandom when the sun is suddenly and abruptly eclipsed, forcing everyone to navigate in the cold, unfamiliar dark?
Let's rewind to that heavy, tear-stained day of April 18, 2023, when J-Hope became the second member to officially pause his glittering worldwide superstardom to enter the 36th Infantry Division Recruit Training Center in Wonju, Gangwon Province. Imagine the sheer psychological whiplash of this transition. This is the very same man who absolutely conquered the global music scene, making history as the first South Korean artist to headline a major U.S. music festival at Lollapalooza with his dark, theatrical, and groundbreaking solo album, Jack in the Box, commanding a sea of over 100,000 screaming fans with just his raw energy and unparalleled stage presence. How does a free-spirited, wildly creative street dancer from Gwangju, whose entire existence revolves around intricate rhythms, fluid movements, and expressive freedom, suddenly adapt to the rigid, uncompromising, and deeply monotonous structure of military life? The anxiety among fans was palpable, yet true to his fiercely disciplined nature, J-Hope didn't just quietly serve, he rose to the absolute top of the ranks, becoming a formidable and highly respected assistant drill instructor, echoing the fierce work ethic established by Jin before him. It's absolutely fascinating, isn't it, to think about the intense duality of a man who can flash a dazzling heart-shaped smile that lights up an entire stadium, yet can simultaneously command a platoon of fresh recruits with a booming, authoritative voice that demands absolute, unwavering respect. But behind those perfectly ironed military uniforms and the impressive shiny badges of an elite special class warrior, what was truly going through J-Hope's mind during those long, quiet nights in the barracks when the adrenaline of the day finally faded away? Did he lie awake, his muscles instinctively twitching, phantom rhythms playing in his head, desperately missing the smell of the practice room and the comforting, chaotic presence of his 6 brothers? He knew the agonizing weight would be unbearable for the fans, so with a level of foresight and meticulous planning that is honestly mind-boggling, he prepared a massive, incredibly complex lifeline for us, the Hope on the Street docuseries and its accompanying special album, released right in the middle of his service in March 2024. While he was physically confined to a military base, his artistic soul was busy traveling the globe, from the gritty streets of Osaka to the vibrant alleys of Paris and New York, reconnecting with his deepest roots as a street dancer and powerfully reminding the world that his passion for dance is an inextinguishable fire. Can you even begin to fathom the intense, bittersweet emotion of sitting in a quiet military facility, stripped of your idol persona, while simultaneously watching your own documentary drop globally, reading the ecstatic reactions of millions of fans who are thousands of miles away, completely unable to perform those new tracks live for them? This profound sacrifice, this agonizing separation of the artist from his art at the moment of its release, is a crucial, heartbreaking piece of the OT7 puzzle. And then, finally, the heavens seemed to open up on October 17th, 2024, the glorious, highly anticipated day of his official military discharge. The media circus was absolutely deafening. The global trending topics were instantly hijacked, and there, amidst the flashing cameras and screaming crowds, was Jin, who had hilariously hijacked the press conference by kneeling down to hold a massive bundle of microphones for a deeply embarrassed but overjoyed J-Hope. It was a chaotic, beautiful, and deeply moving testament to their unbreakable brotherhood, a visual representation of the Hyungs slowly but surely gathering the family back together, piece by piece. But returning to civilian life isn't just a simple flip of a switch, especially not for the main dancer and the strict, detail-oriented performance leader of the world's biggest musical act. As the highly anticipated 2025 OT7 reunion loomed closer, and the members began to gradually reassemble, the immense, terrifying pressure must have been incredibly suffocating. J-Hope wasn't just coming back to sing, he was returning to reclaim his demanding throne as the choreographer-in-chief, the relentless engine that drives the legendary razor-sharp synchronization of BTS. Imagine that very first monumental day back in the legendary High Practice Studios, with all 7 members finally present in the same room after years of painful separation. The air must have been thick with unspoken emotion, tears undoubtedly shedding, but also heavy with the daunting realization that they had to somehow rebuild their collective muscle memory from scratch. How do you seamlessly reconnect 7 distinct, heavily evolved solo artists back into a single, cohesive, perfectly synchronized organism? J-Hope had to step right back into his role as the strict, eagle-eyed dance leader, pushing his brothers, who had also just returned from grueling military service, to their absolute physical and mental limits to ensure their comeback performance would shatter every single expectation. The physical toll of reconditioning bodies that had been subjected to military marches rather than intricate hip-hop routines must have been agonizing, yet the pure, unadulterated euphoria of looking to his left and to his right, seeing RM, Jin, Suga, Jimin, V, and Jungkook sweating, laughing, and panting in unison once again must have been the ultimate healing balm for his soul. Think about the incredible emotional weight he carried, constantly worrying if the fandom would still be waiting, if the magic they created together could somehow be reignited after such a prolonged freeze. He had tasted the absolute pinnacle of solo success, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that he could command the world all by himself. Yet his ultimate burning desire was always to merge his light back into the massive, blinding constellation of BTS. The journey of J-Hope from the blinding lights of Lollapalooza to the strict discipline of the Wonju base and finally back to the center of the OT7 formation is a stunning, deeply emotional narrative of unwavering duty, artistic starvation, and a triumphant, explosive return to form. When that stage eventually lights up for the full group reunion and the first powerful, earth-shattering beat drops, keep your eyes entirely fixed on J-Hope. The sheer, raw intensity in his movements won't just be choreography, it'll be the physical manifestation of a man who survived the agonizing eclipse, desperately fought his way out of the shadows, and is finally, rightfully commanding the sun to shine brilliantly upon his brothers and his massive global family once again, ready to conquer the world in a way we have never, ever seen before.
Number 5. Sugar, the silent architect of pain and healing, finally complete. When we peel back the dazzling, blinding layers of BTS's massive global superstardom to look closely at the raw, pulsating creative engine underneath, we inevitably arrive at the fiercely private, intensely brilliant mind of Min Yoongi, the man who seamlessly and powerfully wears the heavy, contrasting crowns of both Sugar and August D. But how does the architect of their deepest, most emotional sounds navigate the agonizingly quiet reality of military service? And what happens to his creative soul when his 6 muses are suddenly stripped away? To truly understand the sheer magnitude of his eventual return to the OT7 formation, we absolutely must rewind to the deeply emotional, tear-soaked night of August 6, 2023, during the spectacular finale of his historic D-Day solo world tour in Seoul. Have you ever witnessed a man bare his entire, unfiltered soul to a roaring stadium of thousands? As he stood on that stage, clutching his guitar, openly sobbing as he tried to sing the heartbreaking lyrics of Snooze and Dear My Friend, the entire fandom collectively held its breath, instantly realizing that these weren't just tears of triumph, they were the heavy, agonizing tears of an impending, inevitable farewell. He literally gave us every single ounce of his energy, his trauma, his healing, and his passion before turning around and walking through that symbolic door at the end of the stage, effectively shutting it behind him as a massive chapter of his life closed. Just weeks later, on September 22, he officially began his mandatory service, but unlike Jin and J-Hope, who marched into remote, rigid military bases, Sugar's path was starkly different, carrying its own unique, incredibly heavy psychological weight. Due to the infamous long-standing shoulder injury that he had quietly and
painfully endured for years, a haunting remnant of his struggling pre-debut days as a delivery driver. He was assigned to serve as a social service agent. Imagine the profound, jarring psychological contrast of this daily reality. One day, you are a literal rap god, commanding sold-out arenas across the globe, spewing fire and raw truth into a microphone with millions chanting your name. And the next, you are quietly commuting on public transport, walking the ordinary streets of Seoul, stepping into a completely normal public office, blending into the invisible masses of everyday civilian life. Did he find a strange, comforting peace in this sudden, stark anonymity, or did the deafening absence of the stage lights drive his restless, fiercely musical mind absolutely crazy? While the world kept spinning and the ruthless entertainment industry frantically churned out new acts, Yoongi, the genius producer who practically lived inside the dark, comforting walls of his Genius Lab studio, was suddenly forced to exist in the mundane daylight. But of course, being the meticulous, deeply caring soul that he is beneath his tough, seemingly untouchable exterior, he absolutely refused to let his massive global family starve in the cold, deafening silence of his absence. Enter Satwita, his incredibly brilliant pre-recorded talk show that served as the ultimate emotional lifeline for the fandom during the hardest, most barren months of the hiatus. Think about the sheer, staggering amount of dedication and extreme physical exhaustion required to film dozens of intimate, emotionally heavy episodes back-to-back right before his enlistment, just to ensure that we would still have a warm, comforting place to gather, drink, and laugh with him while he was physically fulfilling his duties. He literally left precious pieces of his heart scattered across the calendar, perfectly timed to comfort us precisely when the agonizing weight felt the most unbearable. But let's fast forward to the breathtaking, heart-stopping reality of the epic OT7 reunion, because this is exactly where Suga's narrative transforms from a somber story of quiet endurance into a spectacular, explosive saga of artistic rebirth. Can you even begin to comprehend the intense, electric atmosphere inside the High building the day Min Yoongi finally walked back into his legendary studio, not as a solo artist desperately trying to hold the fort, but as the main producer, eagerly, hungrily waiting for his 6 brothers to walk through the door? For years, his primary canvas was painted exclusively with his own personal trauma, his aggressive alter ego, and his deep, solitary reflections. But suddenly, the room is phenomenally full again. The chaotic, deafening laughter of Jin, the soothing, deep baritone of V, the angelic, piercing high notes of Jimin, the rhythmic, philosophical genius of RM, the infectious, driving energy of J-Hope, and the limitless, golden vocal power of Jungkook are all crashing back into his creative sanctuary. How overwhelming must it be for the man who translates their collective heartbeat into chart-topping melodies to finally have his ultimate favorite instruments back in perfect, glorious alignment? The pressure to craft the definitive, earth-shattering comeback sound of the century must be absolutely terrifying, yet wildly, aggressively intoxicating for a dedicated workaholic like him. He has spent the last chapters silently observing the real world, absorbing the daily struggles of ordinary people during his public service, and quietly gathering an immense, overflowing reservoir of brand new stories, fresh, mature perspectives, and incredibly deep emotions. When he finally sits behind that massive mixing console, surrounded by the triumphant, matured, and battle-tested members of BTS, the music that pours out of him won't just be another catchy pop hit. It will be a raw, seismic, and deeply emotional reflection of absolutely everything they survived separately and everything they are ready to boldly conquer together. Will we get the aggressive, spitfire, unstoppable rap of his youth, or a profoundly evolved, incredibly wise and expansive sound born from the quiet, humbling years of serving his country in the shadows? One thing is absolutely, undeniably certain. Suga is the sturdy, unshakable backbone of BTS's emotional authenticity. He is the quiet, vigilant observer who notices every single tear, every unspoken anxiety of his younger brothers, and silently and masterfully weaves those heavy burdens into lyrics that ultimately heal millions across the globe. The historic, highly anticipated reunion of OT7 isn't just a simple return to the stage for Yoongi. It is the ultimate, glorious vindication of his famous tear-jerking promise to the fans during that agonizing final concert. Everything will be okay. The future's gonna be okay. He bravely walked through the darkest, quietest valleys, carried the immense weight of his own physical limitations without complaint, and faithfully and honorably served his time, all so he could proudly stand on that grand, magnificent stage again, look out at the breathtaking sea of purple lights, glance over at the 6 extraordinary men who are quite literally his destined soulmates, and strike the very first earth-shattering piano chord of their brand new, fiercely unstoppable era.
Number 4. RM, the crushing weight of the crown and the mastermind's glorious return. Imagine carrying the crushing, incomprehensible weight of being the sole spokesperson, the philosophical anchor, and the undisputed leader of the biggest musical phenomenon in human history for over a decade, only to suddenly strip it all away to become an ordinary soldier in the muddy, freezing trenches of the South Korean winter. This is the profound, deeply emotional reality of Kim Namjoon, universally revered as RM, the towering intellectual giant who quite literally built the foundational DNA of BTS from the ground up. When December 11th, 2023 finally arrived, sending a massive, agonizing shockwave through the global fandom, RM didn't just walk into the Nonsan training center. He carried the collective anxieties, the tearful farewells, and the incredibly heavy, unspoken promises of millions of armies securely tucked inside his heart. Do you remember that chaotic, deeply emotional, and tear-filled Weverse Live, where he bravely showed off his fresh buzz cut, desperately trying to laugh and smile through the heavy, suffocating sorrow of his impending departure? He was constantly, relentlessly worrying about us, about the fans, apologizing for the temporary pause, even when he was the one bravely stepping into the freezing, unforgiving cold. But who is Kim Namjoon when he is forcefully separated from his 6 soulmates, the very brothers he practically raised and safely guided through the treacherous, cutthroat waters of the global music industry? For years, he was the flawless, eloquent diplomat who stood tall at the podium of the United Nations, delivering speeches that profoundly moved entire generations. The genius lyricist who perfectly translated the complex, agonizing struggles of youth into chart-topping, world-dominating anthems. Yet beneath the polished, brilliant exterior of the leader, there was always a deeply introspective, furiously wandering soul desperately searching for his own distinct identity outside the massive, suffocating shadow of the BTS brand. His military enlistment wasn't just a mandatory duty, it became a crucial, heavily scrutinized philosophical journey, a forced isolation that made him brutally confront the man in the mirror without the deafening roar of the stadiums echoing in his ears. The transition from the brilliant art-collecting RM who peacefully wandered the quiet, sacred halls of museums across the globe to Kim Namjoon, the dedicated soldier carrying a rifle and playing in a military band, is a stunning testament to his staggering adaptability and mental fortitude. Think about the profound artistic rebellion of his second solo album, Right Place, Wrong Person, released right in the dead center of his grueling military service in May 2024. While he was physically marching in heavy combat boots and serving faithfully in the 15th Infantry Division, his restless, brilliant mind was simultaneously dropping a sonically chaotic, breathtakingly honest, and Grammy-worthy alternative masterpiece that completely shattered every single preconceived notion of what a K-pop idol should sound like.
He was miles away, wearing a rigid military uniform, yet he successfully managed to completely dominate the global cultural conversation, fiercely proving that true, unadulterated artistry cannot be confined behind barbed wire fences. But let's talk about the agonizing, quiet loneliness of leadership. Consider the immense psychological toll of being the undisputed brain of BTS. Every major decision, every significant musical direction, every delicate public statement in times of crisis had always naturally fallen to him. He bravely carried the heavy weight of the Asian community during the Stop Asian Hate movement at the White House. He fiercely defended the artistic integrity of the entire K-pop industry, and suddenly he had to let it all completely go. During those long, brutal night watches, staring up at the same moon that his brothers were looking at from completely different military bases, did the immense, terrifying fear of the unknown ever creep into his incredibly analytical mind? He constantly wrote those breathtaking, deeply poetic, and notoriously long letters to the fans on Weavers, pouring his vulnerable, bleeding heart out into the digital void, desperately trying to reassure us while subtly seeking comfort himself. He openly confessed to the creeping anxieties of time passing, the profound melancholic nostalgia for the chaotic, beautiful days when all 7 of them would cram into a tiny waiting room, and the burning, desperate question of whether the magic they created could truly withstand the ultimate test of time and forced separation. And then, in a moment of absolute legendary hilarity that instantly broke the internet, who could ever forget the iconic, wildly unexpected sight of RM joyfully blasting his saxophone in his bright red military band uniform to celebrate Jin's discharge? It was a brilliantly chaotic, deeply endearing glimpse into the resilient, unbreakable spirit of the leader, completely unbothered by his superstar status, just purely ecstatically happy to welcome his eldest brother back to the civilian world. That single viral moment was the absolute turning point, the powerful visual guarantee that the promised reunion wasn't just a fragile dream, but an inevitable, fast-approaching reality. Fast forward to the monumental, earth-shattering moment when the entire group finally, officially reconvened. The sheer, overwhelming magnitude of RM stepping back into his rightful, demanding position as the captain of the ship is a narrative of epic proportions. Rebuilding the legendary OT7 synergy isn't just about perfectly synchronizing dance moves. It requires the meticulous, empathetic, and incredibly draining emotional labor of realigning 7 highly evolved, fiercely independent global superstars back into a single, cohesive, unstoppable force. Imagine the intense, emotionally charged atmosphere in that very first historic board meeting at HYBE. RM sitting at the head of the table, looking deeply into the eyes of Jin, Suga, J-Hope, Jimin, V, and Jungkook, men who had all separately conquered the world, survived the grueling physical and mental trials of the military, and returned with their own distinct, matured perspectives. The boys are no longer the underdog kids from a small, struggling company. They are seasoned, battle-hardened veterans of the industry who have conquered every conceivable peak. RM's monumental task is no longer about proving they belong. It is about cementing their immortal, untouchable legacy. The immense, terrifying pressure to deliver a comeback that doesn't just meet, but absolutely obliterates the impossibly high expectations of the entire music industry rests almost entirely on his broad shoulders. He has to masterfully translate their collective trauma, their triumphant individual growth, and their profound, tear-jerking reunion into a brand new musical manifesto that will instantly resonate with millions. The highly anticipated comeback album will undoubtedly be a lyrical masterpiece, a stunning, raw reflection of their fractured time apart and their glorious, unbreakable bond.
He will weave beautiful, agonizing tales of winter nights spent guarding the barracks, of the phantom echoes of armies' deafening cheers that kept them alive in the darkest, quietest moments, and the fierce, unyielding brotherhood that pulled them all back together like an undeniable force of gravity. When RM finally raises his microphone on that spectacularly massive, long-awaited reunion stage, his deep, resonant voice cutting through the hysterical screams of the crowd, you won't just be listening to a rapper, you will be witnessing the glorious, triumphant resurrection of a king who patiently, agonizingly waited in the shadows, fiercely guarded his kingdom from afar, and has officially returned to lead his brothers into an unprecedented, absolutely legendary new era that will permanently rewrite the history books of music.
Number 3. Jimin, the ethereal swan's frontline battle in the embrace of a lifetime. When examining the intricate, deeply emotional tapestry of BTS, it is absolutely impossible to overlook the radiant, desperately beating heart of the group, Park Jimin, a man whose staggering global success is only matched by his profound, intensely vulnerable reliance on his 6 chosen brothers. To truly grasp the agonizing magnitude of his enlistment and his eventual triumphant return to the OT7 formation, we must first deeply understand the terrifying psychological cliff he had to jump from when December 12, 2023 finally arrived. Unlike the solitary journeys of the older members, Jimin made the profoundly moving, deeply calculated decision to enlist alongside the youngest member, Jungkook, utilizing the South Korean military's companion soldier system to enter the notoriously rigorous 5th Infantry Division in Yeoncheon. Why did he choose this incredibly grueling, physically demanding frontline path? It was a stunning visual testament to his desperate need for familial connection, a silent acknowledgement that navigating the cold, terrifyingly unfamiliar world of the military would be infinitely more bearable if he could just look over his shoulder and see a familiar, comforting face. But let's painfully rewind for a moment to the absolutely staggering, history-making peaks he conquered right before having his platinum blonde hair unceremoniously shaved off. Jimin didn't just casually release a solo album, he absolutely obliterated the global music industry with Face, dropping the hypnotic, intoxicating synth-pop masterpiece Like Crazy and instantly shattering the ultimate glass ceiling by becoming the very first South Korean solo artist in entire history to debut at #1 on the fiercely competitive Billboard Hot 100 chart. He was the undisputed, shining king of the pop world, attending exclusive Dior fashion shows as a global ambassador, completely mesmerizing the Western media with his undeniable ethereal charm and that distinct, honey-sweet vocal tone that literally melts hearts on contact. Imagine the sheer, unadulterated psychological whiplash of transitioning from that blinding, intoxicating pinnacle of international superstardom to waking up at the crack of dawn in a freezing, deeply uncomfortable military barrack, stripped of all designer clothes, meticulously applied makeup, and the deafening, adoring screams of millions of armies. For a man who inherently moves with the delicate, breathtaking grace of a classically trained contemporary dancer, the abrupt, jarring shift to marching with incredibly heavy, soul-crushing combat gear and executing rigid, aggressive artillery drills must have been a profound, deeply shocking trauma to both his body and his intensely sensitive artistic soul. Yet beneath his soft, angelic exterior lies an incredibly fierce, notoriously stubborn perfectionist who absolutely refuses to show weakness to the world. Even while entirely consumed by the grueling, exhausting demands of active military duty, Jimin's mind was constantly, obsessively focused on the fans he left behind, proving his unwavering, desperate love by releasing the profoundly touching acoustic fan song Closer Than This just days after his enlistment, practically begging us to hold on to his hand tightly through the agonizingly long winter.
And as if that wasn't enough to completely shatter our collective hearts, he somehow managed to gift us an entire beautifully crafted second solo album, Muse, right in the dead center of his service in July 2024, dominating the global charts once again with the wildly infectious, marching band-infused anthem Who, and showcasing his phenomenal growth through the wildly entertaining travel series Are You Sure?, filmed alongside Jungkook. He was physically trapped behind heavily guarded military gates, enduring the harsh, bitter realities of frontline duty, yet his deeply romantic, endlessly creative spirit was busy serenading the entire globe, fiercely reminding the industry that his star power cannot be contained by barbed wire or temporary pauses. But let's dive deep into the incredibly heavy, emotional toll of his separation from the older members. Jimin is notoriously known as the ultimate fairy of BTS, the incredibly empathetic, emotionally intuitive caretaker who is always the very first to rush over and offer a warm, comforting hug whenever another member sheds a tear on stage. He physically thrives on their chaotic energy, deeply requiring their constant reassurance and unconditional love to balance his incredibly harsh, self-critical inner voice. During those long, exhausting nights in the Yeoncheon barracks, the terrifying silence must have been his greatest enemy. Did he desperately miss the comforting late-night talks with RM, the hilarious mood-lifting bickering with Jin, or the quiet, reassuring presence of Suga? How agonizing was it to be separated from V, his designated soulmate, the one person who perfectly understands the chaotic, beautiful frequency of his mind without needing to utter a single word? The profound, aching loneliness of being separated from his primary emotional anchors for the very first time in his entire adult life is a completely untold, heartbreaking chapter of his military journey. Now, fast forward to the absolute earth-shattering euphoria of the highly anticipated OT7 reunion. Can you even begin to physically fathom the sheer, unadulterated explosion of emotion the exact moment Park Jimin finally walks through those legendary hype doors and completely collapses into the arms of his older brothers? We all know Jimin. The tears will be absolutely immediate, uncontrollable, and profoundly devastating in the most beautiful way imaginable. The heavy, agonizing armor he had to carefully construct to survive the hyper-masculine, rigidly disciplined world of the military will instantly shatter the second he hears Jin's windshield wiper laugh or feels RM's heavy, comforting hand resting on his shoulder. The monumental pressure of reclaiming his rightful, demanding position as the lead vocalist and main dancer of the world's greatest performance group will be immensely terrifying, yet undeniably exhilarating. He will undoubtedly push his body to the absolute breaking point in the practice room, frantically dieting and obsessively rehearsing every single microscopic angle of his choreography, desperately terrified of disappointing the fans or his members after such a long, agonizing hiatus. Rebuilding that legendary telepathic stage chemistry, especially with his soulmate V and his lifelong dance partner J-Hope, will require shedding rivers of sweat and tears, but the ultimate reward will be absolutely legendary. When that magnificent grand reunion stage finally lights up and the iconic, deeply intoxicating opening notes of Blood, Sweat and Tears or Black Swan violently echo through the massive, packed stadium, keep your eyes entirely locked on Jimin. The sheer, terrifying intensity in his piercing gaze, the flawless, gravity-defying fluidity of his movements, and the incredibly raw, bleeding emotion in his soaring, angelic high notes won't just be another standard idol performance. It will be the majestic, triumphant resurrection of a man who survived the freezing, isolated front line, desperately fought his incredibly harsh internal demons, and finally, miraculously returned
returned to his rightful sanctuary, ready to completely surrender his entire soul to the music, his brothers, and the millions of fans who fiercely guarded his throne while he was away, proving once and for all that the beautiful swan has transformed into an unbreakable, soaring phoenix.
Number 2. V. The soulful rebel's dangerous path and the breathtaking return. When diving into the incredibly complex, mesmerizingly unpredictable universe of BTS, there is one member who constantly, effortlessly defies every single expectation placed upon him. A man whose breathtaking visuals are only rivaled by his deep, oceanic baritone voice and his fiercely independent artistic spirit. Kim Tae-young, known globally as V. To truly comprehend the absolute shockwave he sent through the entire world during the dreaded enlistment period, you absolutely must understand the profound, jarring contrast between his carefully crafted, soulful idol persona and the terrifying, hyper-intense military path he deliberately, surprisingly, chose to walk down. We all vividly remember the incredibly bittersweet, melancholic atmosphere of late 2023, right on the heels of his spectacular, critically acclaimed solo debut album, Layover. V had just gifted the world an exquisitely beautiful, vintage-drenched masterpiece, wrapping us warmly in a comforting blanket of slow-tempo R&B, sultry jazz influences, and deeply romantic aesthetics that perfectly mirrored his incredibly old soul. He was the undisputed global prince of luxury, rubbing elbows with international fashion elite, dominating magazine covers with a single smoldering look, and casually breaking Instagram records in his sleep while sipping fine wine. Yet when the heavy, inevitable reality of his mandatory service arrived on December 11, 2023, enlisting quietly alongside his brilliant leader RM, V completely shattered the internet and instantly stopped millions of hearts globally by actively, voluntarily applying for the Special Task Force, SDT, of the Capitol Defense Command. Can you even begin to physically process that immense, mind-boggling juxtaposition? The man who famously loves romantic, rainy Parisian nights, vintage film cameras, abstract art, and smooth saxophone solos deliberately threw himself into a brutally elite, aggressively demanding anti-terrorism unit, heavily known for its grueling, soul-crushing physical combat training, extreme counterinsurgency tactics, and heavy, intimidating tactical weaponry. Why did the delicate, artistic winter bear choose the absolute hardest, most dangerous path available to him? He boldly confessed to the terrified, wildly anxious fans on Weverse that he wanted to aggressively challenge his own limits, to completely tear down his comfortable walls, and to build a brand new, unshakable physical and mental resilience that would transform him from the inside out. And my goodness, did he ever deliver on that terrifying, bold promise. When those jaw-dropping, incredibly intimidating photos of V, completely decked out in his pitch-black, elite SDT tactical uniform, officially surfaced online, flawlessly showcasing a heavily bulked-up physique, fierce, uncompromising eyes staring sharply through a combat balaclava, and an intimidating sniper rifle resting naturally in his hands, the massive global fandom completely lost their collective minds, effectively shutting down multiple social media platforms in a collective, breathless panic. The visual transformation was absolutely staggering, a literal blockbuster movie character vividly brought to life, completely obliterating any lingering image of the soft, delicate idol we tearfully waved goodbye to at the training center gates. But beneath that impenetrable, highly intimidating black armor and the rigorous, terrifying daily combat drills, the deeply affectionate, desperately loving soul of Kim Tae-young remained furiously, passionately active. He meticulously, obsessively planned an overwhelming avalanche of digital content to ensure that his beloved army would never, ever feel the agonizing cold of his physical absence.
From his heart-wrenching cinematic acting masterpiece as a tragic, battle-scarred romantic hero in IU's breathtaking Love Wins All music video, completely destroying our tear ducts before he even officially began his service, to the shockingly upbeat, wildly infectious pop soul release of his solo single Friends, precisely dropped in the dead center of his service in March 2024. V aggressively proved that his creative genius operates on an entirely different, untouchable frequency. He even casually released a stunningly beautiful, highly intimate photo book titled Type 1, perfectly capturing his raw, unedited, and incredibly vulnerable pre-enlistment moments of relaxation, serving as a visual love letter explicitly designed to intensely comfort the millions who were desperately counting down the agonizingly long days until his highly anticipated return. Yet the true, deeply emotional core of his military journey fundamentally lies in the profound, aching separation from his absolute lifeline, the other 6 members of BTS. V is notoriously incredibly tactile. He is a man who authentically expresses his deep, overflowing love through physical closeness, constantly wrapping his long limbs around Jimin, resting his chin heavily on Jungkook's broad shoulder, or fiercely hugging Jin from behind during chaotic, legendary stadium concerts. How did this intensely affectionate, deeply sensitive soul survive the incredibly rigid, strictly no-touch, hyper-masculine environment of the elite special forces? The agonizing loneliness of silently staring at a sterile concrete military ceiling late at night, completely stripped of the warm, chaotic, and deeply comforting presence of their chosen family, must have been a daily, agonizing psychological battle that he fought entirely alone. Did he stare out at the unforgiving training grounds, his newly built muscles screaming in pure agony from the brutal SDT drills, and desperately long for the familiar, comforting chaos of the Hive practice room? Now deeply envision the absolute, earth-shattering magnitude of the exact moment Kim Tae-young finally, officially walks back into the desperate embrace of OT7. The immense, terrifying pressure to seamlessly transition from an elite, hardened anti-terrorism operative back into the smooth, deeply expressive, and incredibly charismatic performer we all desperately missed is a colossal, unprecedented undertaking that would easily crush a lesser artist. When he finally reunites with his designated, lifelong soulmate Jimin, the resulting explosion of raw, unfiltered tears and desperate, bone-crushing hugs will undoubtedly break the internet all over again, powerfully healing a massive, agonizing void that has painfully existed in the fandom for years. The massive, intimidating physical strength and rigid, unwavering discipline he acquired in the military will inevitably, beautifully bleed into his legendary stage presence, elevating his already lethal, magnetic aura to a completely terrifying, godlike level of pure dominance. Imagine him standing shoulder to shoulder with a deeply mature Jungkook, a fiercely hardened RM, and the rest of the fiercely battle-tested Hyungs. The collective, overwhelming visual power and intense gravitational pull of the newly reformed septet will literally rewrite the established laws of the global entertainment industry. V isn't just bringing back his deep, soulful baritone to flawlessly complete the legendary BTS vocal line. He is bringing back an incredibly dangerous, heavily evolved, and wildly unpredictable energy that will completely redefine their upcoming musical era. Will he lean into a dark, gritty, and fiercely aggressive aesthetic, perfectly mirroring his intense, adrenaline-fueled SDT experience? Or will he beautifully, seamlessly merge his newfound physical dominance with his classic, romantic jazz roots to create something entirely mind-blowingly unprecedented that the world has never heard before? The highly anticipated, legendary OT7 comeback stage will undoubtedly be the ultimate glorious vindication of his terrifying gamble. The global music industry isn't fully prepared for the sheer gravitational force of this brand new Kim Tae-young. His incredibly unique, deep and velvety vocal tone, often described by critics as the absolute secret weapon of the group's massive discography, will now uniquely carry the profound, heavy weight of his brutal military experiences, injecting an even deeper, more resonant layer of raw emotion into their highly anticipated future tracks. The boy who once stared wistfully at the starry skies of New Zealand during Bon Voyage has fundamentally transformed into a formidable, physically imposing warrior who boldly conquered the absolute toughest physical challenges his nation could ever throw at him. Yet the exact moment he locks eyes with his 6 eternal brothers on that massive, blinding reunion stage, that intense, intimidating exterior will immediately melt away, wonderfully revealing the exact same fiercely loyal, deeply loving, and wildly creative spirit that originally captured the hearts of millions across the globe. The staggering, beautiful duality of his personal journey, from releasing the chillest, most soothing romantic album of the entire year to enduring the most physically punishing military unit known to man, is a profound, undeniable testament to his limitless, awe-inspiring versatility. And when he finally, proudly steps back into his rightful spot alongside his eternal family, the universe itself will inevitably pause to properly witness the triumphant.
Number 1. Jungkook, the Golden Maknae's ultimate sacrifice, and the earth-shattering OT7 climax. When we desperately attempt to fully comprehend the absolute, undisputed peak of modern global pop music, our eyes inevitably, magnetically lock onto the staggering, world-conquering phenomenon that is Jungkook, the eternally beloved Golden Maknae, whose journey perfectly encapsulates a very soul, the beating heart, and the ultimate tear-jerking climax of the historic BTS reunion. To truly, deeply understand the sheer, earth-shattering magnitude of his eventual return to the OT7 formation, we absolutely must dramatically rewind to the blinding, intoxicating heights he conquered right before he made the most shocking, profoundly selfless decision of his entire career. Imagine completely dominating the global music industry, single-handedly rewriting Billboard history, and reigning supreme as the ultimate pop prince. In the final chaotic months of 2023, Jungkook didn't just casually release music, he unleashed a cultural tsunami with his monumental solo debut album Golden. He completely shattered every conceivable Spotify streaming record with the fiercely infectious UK garage-inspired anthem 7 featuring Lotto, commanded an entirely unprecedented massive guerrilla performance on the dazzling TSX stage right in the pulsating heart of New York's Times Square, and flawlessly channeled the legendary, untouchable energy of Michael Jackson with the wildly groovy, impeccably choreographed masterpiece Standing Next to You. He was undeniably, irrefutably sitting alone on the highest, most coveted throne of the global pop world, wildly praised by international critics, completely adored by millions of frantic fans, and heavily courted by the biggest names in the Western entertainment industry who desperately wanted a piece of his limitless golden magic. By all traditional industry metrics, logic, and standard business practices, he easily could have and arguably should have delayed his mandatory military service to the absolute final legal minute, aggressively embarking on a massively lucrative sold-out solo stadium world tour that would have cemented his individual legacy for decades. Yet, in a move that completely shocked the cutthroat music industry but beautifully, perfectly reaffirmed the deeply pure, fiercely loyal essence of his character, he deliberately, voluntarily chose to violently hit the brakes on his skyrocketing solo momentum. On December 12, 2023, choosing the incredibly comforting, deeply emotional path of the companion soldier system alongside his beloved Jimin, Jungkook bravely walked away from the blinding camera flashes and deafening stadium roars to quietly enter the notoriously rigorous, freezing confines of the 5th Infantry Division in Yeonchan.
Why? Because the burning, desperate desire to reunite with his 6 older brothers in 2025 heavily outweighed every single ounce of solo glory the world could possibly offer him. You have to profoundly understand that Jungkook did not just join a band, he was literally, essentially raised by BTS. He traveled from the quiet streets of Busan to the chaotic, intimidating sprawl of Seoul as a remarkably shy, wide-eyed 15-year-old boy, and it was RM's towering intellect, Jin's broad shoulders, Suga's quiet protection, J-Hope's relentless sunshine, Jimin's tender empathy, and V's chaotic, beautiful friendship that actively molded him into the extraordinary, unstoppable force of nature he is today. His entirely unique, deeply intertwined identity is fundamentally rooted in the very existence of OT7. As he famously sang in his heartbreaking solo track Begin, he feels like he is dying when his brothers are sad. The agonizing transition from being the universally pampered, deeply adored youngest member of the world's biggest musical act to becoming a heavily disciplined, strictly ranked soldier must have been a profoundly jarring, intense psychological shock. But true to his golden moniker, perfectly excelling at absolutely everything he touches, Jungkook didn't just survive the military, he beautifully, humbly pivoted, reportedly taking on the incredibly demanding, deeply essential role of a military culinary soldier. Imagine the staggering, beautiful humility of that specific reality. The very same man who casually wore custom, diamond-encrusted Calvin Klein outfits on giant global billboards and effortlessly sang to millions across the globe was now waking up before dawn, meticulously chopping vegetables, sweating over massive boiling pots of soup, and diligently serving hot meals to his fellow exhausted soldiers. It is a wildly endearing, profoundly poetic testament to his deeply nurturing, humiliating nature and his infamous obsessive perfectionism, seamlessly transferring his fierce dedication from the recording booth to the military kitchen. Yet, beneath the heavy, camouflage apron and the rigorous, highly structured daily routines, his deeply romantic, hopelessly devoted artist soul never stopped frantically beating for the millions of armies he left behind. He ensured his protective, loving presence was constantly felt, gifting the fandom the wildly successful, deeply introspective documentary film I Am Still, which beautifully showcased his raw, unfiltered vulnerabilities, his intense, crippling anxieties behind the scenes of his massive solo success, and his desperate, unrelenting drive for sheer perfection. Furthermore, right in the emotional, heavily nostalgic center of the 2024 BTS Festa, he unexpectedly dropped the wildly infectious, deeply comforting fan song Never Let Go, a pulsing, heavily rhythmic electronic love letter that served as a powerful, undeniable sonic lifeline, aggressively demanding that the fans hold on to his hand tightly through the agonizingly quiet, dark months of his absence. The profound, aching loneliness of being entirely separated from the 6 men who quite literally serve as his primary emotional compass must have been a daily, incredibly heavy cross to bear. Did he quietly look up at the freezing winter sky above the military base, his heavily calloused hands smelling of garlic and military rations, and desperately miss the chaotic, deafening laughter of the hive waiting rooms? Now, we must vividly, deeply envision the absolute, earth-shattering, history-making magnitude of the exact moment Jungkook finally, officially completes his service and walks right back into the desperately waiting arms of a fully reunited BTS. The sheer, overwhelming explosion of pure, unadulterated emotion will inevitably be a cinematic spectacle that beautifully defies all human language. When the youngest, completely hardened by his rigorous military experience, yet still deeply, universally retaining his wide-eyed, doe-like innocence, finally locks eyes with his incredibly proud, fiercely protective Hayoungs, the resulting tears will completely flood the internet, powerfully mending the deeply fractured hearts of millions of fans worldwide. the immense, terrifying pressure to seamlessly merge his newfound, towering solo confidence, his heavily refined, incredibly lethal stage presence, and his physically dominant, mature aura back into the collective, heavily synchronized organism of BTS will be a colossal, unprecedented artistic challenge. But this is the exact moment the entire globe has been furiously holding its breath for. When that spectacularly massive, long-awaited reunion stage eventually lights up and the 7 magnificent, intensely battle-tested icons stand perfectly shoulder to shoulder once again, Jungkook will powerfully reclaim his rightful, highly demanding position precisely at the absolute gravitational center of the formation. His limitless, soaring, golden vocals, heavily enriched by the profound, quiet struggles of his deeply isolated military journey, will pierce completely through the hysterical, deafening screams of the massive stadium crowd, powerfully carrying the incredibly heavy, beautiful weight of every single tear shed, every agonizing day counted, and every desperate promise kept during their long, agonizing hiatus. He represents the ultimate, spectacular culmination of the BTS universe, the boy who courageously sacrificed his undisputed, historic solo crown, fiercely humbled himself in the freezing, anonymous trenches of military duty, and desperately fought his way back home, solely and beautifully proving to the entire universe that no amount of global fame, no heavily guarded military gates, and absolutely no passage of time could ever break the immortal, profoundly beautiful, and eternally golden bond of 7 boys who spectacularly conquered the world together, paving the way for a brand new, wildly unstoppable, and completely legendary era of OT7 that will fundamentally rewrite the history of music forever.
And there you have it, the complete, breathtaking, and deeply emotional tapestry of the most anticipated reunion in the history of global pop culture, beautifully wrapping up an agonizing era of forced separation that profoundly tested the absolute limits of human loyalty. We have meticulously, passionately traced the grueling, tear-soaked footsteps of 7 completely ordinary boys from South Korea who spectacularly conquered the entire globe, bravely and selflessly stepped away from their dazzling, untouchable thrones at the absolute dizzying peak of their unprecedented careers, and endured the freezing, isolating realities of mandatory military service just to faithfully fulfill a sacred, unbreakable promise to each other and to the millions of fiercely dedicated fans worldwide. But as we stand here breathing the incredibly electric air of this magnificent, highly anticipated new era, witnessing the awe-inspiring literal resurrection of RM, Jin, Suga, J-Hope, Jimin, V, and Jungkook as the invincible, unstoppable force known as OT7, we must profoundly, deeply ask ourselves what exactly happens now that the universe has finally realigned. The global music industry has desperately, frantically held its breath for years, aggressively churning out countless new acts in a desperate, ultimately futile attempt to fill the massive, gaping void left by their temporary pause. But can anyone or anything truly replicate the raw, lightning-in-a-bottle synergy of these 7 distinct, fiercely matured souls violently colliding on a massive stadium stage once again? Think deeply about the sheer, terrifying artistic evolution they have undergone behind those heavily guarded, brutally unforgiving military gates. They are absolutely no longer the hungry, underdog rookies fighting desperately for a single broadcast spot, nor are they simply the polished, flawlessly choreographed global diplomats who smoothly charmed the United Nations and the White House. They have triumphantly returned as incredibly hardened, profoundly introspective, and aggressively independent men who have physically and mentally survived the absolute toughest, most grueling trials their nation could ever throw at them, completely stripping away the blinding, suffocating, idle glamour to confront their rawest, most vulnerable human core in the dead, freezing silence of the barracks.
How will the aggressive, brilliantly commanding, and deeply philosophical leadership of RM organically, beautifully blend with the newly forged, highly intimidating tactical resilience and physical dominance of V? Will the agonizing, silent reflections of Suga's mundane public service profoundly darken, mature, and deepen the spectacular, soaring, angelic vocal runs of a heavily disciplined, fiercely independent Jungkook and the emotionally rich, deeply resonant high notes of a combat-tested Jimin, as the massive, deafening, earth-shattering roar of the stadium crowds inevitably erupts once again, fiercely shaking the very tectonic plates of the earth and instantly crashing the service of every single ticketing platform in existence? One undeniable, absolute truth remains spectacularly crystal clear. The agonizing weight, with all of its countless bitter tears, crippling late-night anxieties, and desperate, beautifully poetic Weverse letters, was spectacularly, unequivocally, and unconditionally worth it. This monumental return isn't just a standard, highly budgeted industry comeback. It is a legendary, earth-shattering cultural reset, a profound, historic testament to a brotherhood so incredibly pure, magically intertwined, and fiercely resilient that it effortlessly, completely defied the ruthless, cutthroat laws of the notoriously fickle entertainment industry and the relentless, unforgiving passage of time itself. They literally traded their heavily embellished, custom-designed stage outfits and dazzling, diamond-encrusted microphones for incredibly heavy, soul-crushing combat boots and cold, unforgiving steel rifles, yet they somehow miraculously managed to keep the fragile, beautiful flame of their artistry fiercely burning in the darkest, most isolating winters of their entire lives. Now, as the blinding, breathtaking purple ocean violently, passionately surges back to life, aggressively and beautifully illuminating the darkest, quietest corners of the globe with an incredibly renewed, totally unstoppable wave of hope, we are left staring breathlessly at the grand, magnificent stage with our hearts completely trapped in our throats, desperately wondering what groundbreaking, unimaginable musical phenomenons, what genre-defying, chart-obliterating masterpieces are they secretly, meticulously cooking up in those legendary, highly secured HYBE studios right at this very second. Are we, as a global society, truly, mentally, and physically prepared for the unprecedented, staggering magnitude of the brand new, heavily evolved BTS universe? Or will the sheer, overwhelming gravitational force of their united, highly synchronized return completely, violently obliterate every single chart, streaming record, and limiting expectation we thought we securely knew? The undisputed kings of the 21st century have officially, triumphantly reclaimed their rightful, untouchable throne. The desperately fragmented, beautifully complex pieces of the ultimate global puzzle have flawlessly, perfectly snapped back together, and the most thrilling, dangerously unpredictable, and fiercely emotional chapter of their immortal golden legacy is officially unfolding right before our very wide, tear-filled eyes. The entire universe is collectively holding its breath. The blinding purple lights are frantically charging up to maximum capacity, and the only terrifying, exhilarating question left aggressively echoing in the massive, heavy, and deafening silence right before the very first explosive, heart-stopping beat drops is, are you truly, deeply ready to witness the beautiful, unstoppable storm of the new OT7 era?